In life and in death, legendary Indiana coach Bob Knight did things his way. Knight died this week at age 83 after a long illness. The general was a looming force in college basketball for the nearly 3 decades he coached the Hoosiers. His teams hung 3 banners in Simon Scott Assembly Hall. A makeshift memorial is growing outside the arena now.
You can call a guy, a bad guy because he talks to people the way he does or whatever, but it makes him a great teacher.
But for all the winning, Knight was just as known for his controversies on and off the court. While critics fumed about his conduct, his defenders rallied behind him. Pat Bean reports on Knight's legacy and while he'll always be remembered as one of the greatest coaches in the history of basketball.
Bob Knight was just 29 years old when he became the head basketball coach at Indiana University in 1971, and he quickly turned the program into one of the nation's best. For nearly 3 decades, Knight roamed the sidelines at Simon Scott Assembly Hall, winning 3 NCAA championships, an NIT, and 11 Big Ten titles, and the hearts of Hoosier fans across the nation.
Indiana basketball will always be Bob Knight. Will always be.
Robert Montgomery Knight was born on October 25, 1940. He grew up in Orrville, a small town outside of Akron, Ohio. In college, he played on the 1960 Ohio State team that won the NCAA championship. His first head coaching job was at West Point, but it was at Indiana, the state where basketball is king, that Knight made his mark. A stern disciplinarian, Knight was known for his motion offense and man-to-man defense. He also emphasized his players went to class and graduated, developing lifelong bonds with many of them.
He taught me how to play the game of basketball from a fundamental standpoint. He taught me how to be a man on and off the floor. And that was huge for me, coming out of the inner cities of Indianapolis.
Woodson, who went on to play and coach in the NBA, was just one of a number of college stars to play under Knight. Buckner, May, Thomas, Alford, Bailey, Cheney, Henderson, the list goes on and on. With them, he won national titles in 1976, 81, and 87. The 76 team remains the last undefeated team to win an NCAA championship. During his induction into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1991, he said all of his accomplishments were because of his players.
I've never felt comfortable with the award Coach of the Year or Coach of anything. I think there's a much more appropriate nomenclature that could be used, and that would be Team of the Year.
But he had a fiery side, never afraid to berate an official or a player during a game.
They'd talk about my temper or something. Well, my temper won a hell of a lot of basketball games.
But while Knight's teams won consistently, he courted controversy. He was charged with assaulting a police officer in Puerto Rico in 1979, and his response to how he handled stress in a 1988 interview with NBC's Connie Chung drew national outrage.
If rape is inevitable, relax and enjoy it. I mean, that's just an old term that you're going to use. The plane's down, so you have no control. I'm not talking about God. I'm not talking about the act of rape. Don't misinterpret me there.
On the court, one moment from a February game in 1985 against Purdue may top them all.
Have the honors shooting the technicals. Looky here. Bobby Knight just threw his chair clear across the free throw lane.
But his antics caught up with him in September of 2000 when he was fired for violating the university's zero-tolerance policy after allegedly grabbing a student.
In an early morning telephone conversation with Coach Knight today, I gave him the option of resigning as head basketball coach. He declined, and I notified him that he was being removed as basketball coach, effective immediately.
Protests of Knight's firing erupted across campus, and 3 days after he was let go, Knight spoke to a large gathering in Dunn Meadow as news helicopters circled overhead.
Just as I've always wanted our players to be a part of the student body, so too have I always wanted our students to be a part of our team.
For nearly 20 years, Knight avoided anything to do with Indiana University, but in 2019, he and his wife Karen moved back to Bloomington. Then, at halftime of a game against Purdue on February 8, 2020, and surrounded by dozens of his former players, Knight walked onto the court at Assembly Hall to a standing ovation. He didn't speak to the crowd, but did lead it in his signature chant.
Defense! Yes, defense! 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 Defense!
IU basketball player, Chicago Bulls player, broadcaster, super sub, some of you know him as, John Laskowski, joins us now with more. Thanks so much for being with us today. We all knew Knight wasn't well, but this certainly hurts, doesn't it?
It does, but he was around so long. I've been involved with him over 50 years now as a high school recruit coming to Indiana and, of course, playing for him and TV for 33 years. It's a time to remember the good things that he did. And there were so many good things that he did, not just for the players, but people that were fans and helping people who were sick, donating money to various causes. Just great memories to have and to relive.
So Knight recruited you to play at IU. Did he recruit himself or did he recruit IU?
It was a little of both. I mean, everybody growing up in Indiana, which I did, you know about Indiana University. I mean, that's the place. And then to learn about the coach and what he had in mind and what he was going to try to do. He was relatively unknown in 1971, just coming from Army as the head coach, but it didn't take long for him to get here and create a brand new culture.
So in terms of strategy, what did Coach Knight bring to the game? How did he change basketball?
So the biggest thing with Indiana, really around the country, was that we were known as the Hurryin' Hoosiers. In the 50s and 60s, Indiana wanted to run the score up, and if you didn't beat the team, it was just because you didn't score enough points, not because you didn't play defense. He got here and said, let's play defense, all right? We can handle the scoring as it comes, but if we hold teams under what they're used to, we're going to win a lot of games. And that's the culture that changed not just Indiana basketball, but a lot more teams playing more defense now and trying to win games that way.
You know, we, of course, talk about the controversial Bob Knight, too. How did that affect you?
Well, I'm a very laid-back, easygoing guy. And, of course, he's out there bigger than life. And it takes a while to adjust to that, but what he's really saying is, I think you can work harder than you think you can. And I'm going to be on you until you show me you can. And when you've got 12 guys realizing that, coming together, it's a powerful tool to make you a better team. And I worked harder than I ever thought I did. And one of his best lines to me was, keep running. You pass out before you die. And so I knew that if I worked hard enough to pass out, he'd revive me. And so I kept running, and it worked out great.
No, we never thought we'd see Bob Knight back in Assembly Hall, but he did come back. What do you think made him come back?
Well, he first moved back, but that didn't mean he was going to be close to the university again. But he got to see more players, he got to see former players, he got to see people he knew from here in town, and I think that accustomed him more to remembering the days when he was here at Indiana and how well they went. And then Randy Whitman's the one with some other guys who called and said, Coach, you need to come to this Purdue game in 2020. And he did, and the ovation was just fantastic, and so many guys showed up that were former players. We just thought it was the best ever, and that really let him know that Indiana still loved him, and we're happy that he came back.
So we have to go, but how will you remember Coach Knight?
Well, he changed my life. You know, my father died when I was 8 years old. He became a father figure for me. And again, achieving more than you can, playing to your potential, that was his key. And I worked to my potential and did everything I could, not to pass the grade, but to do as well as you could. And that was a great lesson that he taught all of us.
Thanks so much for being here today and sharing your stories.
Thank you.
IU Athletics plans to honor Knight by attaching commemorative patches with the initials RMK on the uniforms of the men's and women's basketball teams for the rest of the year. IU football team will also wear RMK decals on their helmets for the remainder of the season.